The Scarlet Letter. When Hollywood tackled Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter in 1934, the result was a film that bore little resemblance to its literary source. Directed by Robert G. Vignola and starring Colleen Moore, the adaptation transformed Hawthorne's dark meditation on sin and redemption into a conventional melodrama. The novel's psychological complexity, particularly Hester Prynne's internal struggle and the community's moral hypocrisy, was largely abandoned in favor of simplified romantic drama. Most shocking to literary purists was the complete rewrite of the ending, where Hawthorne left readers with ambiguous redemption and lingering consequences. The film opted for a happy resolution that completely undermined the source material's themes. The Hays Code's influence was unmistakable, as censors demanded the removal of any content that might glorify adultery or challenge religious authority. Critics were merciless. The New York Times called it a travesty of Hawthorne's masterpiece, while literary magazines published scathing reviews that questioned Hollywood's ability to handle serious literature. Even the film's technical aspects couldn't save it from accusations of artistic bankruptcy. Some film historians suggest this adaptation marked a turning point where studios began viewing classic literature as mere brand recognition rather than artistic source material. The backlash was so severe that it would be decades before another major studio attempted to adapt Hawthorne's work. Of Human Bondage. In 1934, RKO's adaptation of Human Bondage took Somerset Maugham's psychologically brutal novel and softened its harshest edges to appease the newly enforced production code. Directed by John Cromwell but shaped by cautious studio executives, the film stripped away much of the book's raw emotional cruelty. Bette Davis fought to preserve the darkness of Mildred Rogers, delivering a performance so intense that rumors swirled about studio heads regretting how far she pushed the role. Yet censors prevailed, cutting or sanitizing key scenes of Mildred's decline and replacing the novel's bleak ending with a Hollywood resolution of love and redemption, a change critics called a betrayal. Somerset had no creative control and was reportedly furious at the adaptation's compromises, a sentiment echoed by contemporary reviewers who felt the film left the novel's soul behind. Despite the film's safe approach, Davis's performance was so powerful it inspired a wave of write-in votes for Best Actress at the 1935 Academy Awards, even though write-ins were banned that year. Some speculate the backlash from her omission led the Academy to formalize its nomination rules. In the end, Davis brought a fierce authenticity to a film otherwise tamed by censorship. Payton Place. 20th Century Fox's 1957 adaptation of Grace Metalius's Payton Place faced the daunting challenge of turning a scandalous bestseller into a film palatable for mainstream audiences. The novel's raw depictions of domestic violence, sexual assault, and teenage pregnancy were heavily sanitized or omitted, leaving behind a tame melodrama that barely resembled Metalius's original social critique. The most controversial character, Lucas Cross, was softened into a more conventional villain, and the story's brutality was replaced with implied menace and off-screen consequences. Director Mark Robson, constrained by censorship and pressure from religious groups, delivered a film that satisfied neither fans of the book's honesty nor its critics, leading to boycotts and divided reviews. Lana Turner's casting as Constance Mackenzie drew scrutiny for her glamorous image, which clashed with the character's small-town roots. Despite earning 9 Academy Award nominations, the film ignited debates about Hollywood's reluctance to confront serious social issues head-on. Metalius herself was reportedly disappointed with the adaptation, but was contractually silenced. Still, the film's commercial success revealed an audience appetite for adult themes, even in diluted form, paving the way for bolder films in the decade to come. The Great Gatsby. In 1949, Paramount Pictures released a film adaptation of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby that left critics, scholars, and longtime fans baffled. The novel, published in 1925, was a razor-edge dissection of class, illusion, and the rot beneath the American dream. But the film? It leaned into glossy melodrama and romance, sidelining the book's darker undercurrents. While Gatsby's tragic end remained intact, he still dies alone, shot in a case of mistaken vengeance. The tone softened, veering towards sentimentality that critics felt dulled Fitzgerald's original sting. Reviewers at the time, including those at the New York Times, described the film as visually polished but emotionally hollow, a paraphrased consensus that stuck. Censorship under the Hays Code played a significant role. This moral watchdog system, which governed Hollywood content from the 1930s through the 1960s, demanded that films uphold traditional values and avoid controversial themes. Daisy Buchanan's moral ambiguity, central to the novel's tension, was dialed down. Instead of a complex, self-interested figure torn by guilt and privilege, the film version edged her closer to a conventional romantic lead. Alan Ladd, cast as Gatsby, brought a hard and noir-like presence to the role, an odd fit for the character's fragile mystique. Some critics noted he seemed more like a detective than a dreamer, which clashed with the novel's ethereal tone. Rumors swirled around studio interference. Some speculate that Paramount executives, nervous about alienating audiences in post-war America, pushed for a safer, more commercially viable story. Legends even tease that early drafts include a happier ending, only to be scrapped late in production. Whether true or not, the final cut failed to resonate. The film underperformed at the box office, and Paramount quietly shelved any plans for a follow-up adaptation. Today, the 1949 Gatsby stands as a textbook example of how watering down literary grit for mass appeal can backfire. Dr. Jivago. When David Lean's Dr. Jivago premiered in 1965, it dazzled with sweeping visuals and a haunting Maurice Jarre score. But while it looked like a cinematic triumph, many critics and scholars saw something else. A hollowed-out adaptation that stripped Boris Pasternak's novel of its political backbone. The original book, smuggled out of the Soviet Union and published in Italy in 1957, was a layered commentary on authoritarianism, war, and the cost of conformity. The film, however, leaned heavily into romantic melodrama, sidelining the novel's ideological core. Subplots exploring Jivago's moral dilemmas and philosophical reflections were either minimized or cut entirely. Some accounts suggest that MGM, wary of Cold War tensions, preferred a less politically provocative version to avoid stirring controversy. Biographers have noted that Lean reportedly wrestled with how much of the novel's political substance to retain, with rumors of behind-the-scenes disagreements with producers. Legends even tease that Lean viewed the adaptation as a compromise, caught between artistic integrity and studio expectations. As for Pasternak's heirs, some reports hint at mixed reactions, admiration for the film's reach, but disappointment in its intellectual dilution. The New York Times famously called it an epic without a center, capturing the frustration of those who felt the film missed the novel's deeper message. For all its box office success, Dr. Jivago remains a prime example of a classic Hollywood epic that traded substance for spectacle. The Old Man and the Sea. In 1958, Hollywood took on Ernest Hemingway's introspective classic, The Old Man and the Sea, but the adaptation left critics, fans, and even Hemingway himself underwhelmed. Directed by Fred Zinnemann and starring Spencer Tracy, the film struggled to translate the novel's minimalist power to the screen. Instead of embracing the book's silence, the filmmakers relied heavily on Tracy's voiceover narration, a choice that critics like Bosley Crowther argued dulled the emotional impact of Santiago's solitary struggle. While Tracy's performance earned an Academy Award nomination, the film's technical choices, especially the artificial-looking rear projection ocean scenes, drew mixed reviews, with some joking the sea looked more like an aquarium than the Atlantic. The adaptation also downplayed the symbolic weight of the marlin skeleton, a haunting image in the novel. Rumors persist that Hemingway was quietly frustrated by the film's approach, particularly the narration, which he felt blunted the story's meditative core. Despite winning an Oscar for Best Musical Score, the film stands as a cautionary tale of Hollywood's difficulty with literary subtlety during its golden age. The Fountainhead. In 1949, Warner Brothers brought Ayn Rand's novel The Fountainhead to the screen, and controversy followed close behind. Rand penned the screenplay herself, determined to preserve her philosophy of uncompromising individualism. But when the film hit theaters, critics and fans alike questioned what had been lost in translation. While most of Rand's dialogue remained intact, some scenes were trimmed for pacing and the emotional core of the story, especially the complex relationship between Howard Rourke and Dominique Francomme felt flattened. What spanned years in the novel was reduced to a few melodramatic encounters, prompting reviewers to call the romance rushed and unconvincing. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times labeled the film ponderous and confused, a sentiment echoed across the critical landscape. Visually, the film also fell short. Rourke's radical architectural vision, central to the novel's symbolism, was rendered in sets that leaned toward generic post-war modernism. Some speculate that studio pressure or budget constraints dulled the design's boldness. Despite starring Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal, the film underperformed at the box office and left fans of the book disillusioned. Over time, The Fountainhead has become a prime example of how even faithful scripts can falter when cinematic execution misses the spirit of the source. King Solomon's Mines. In 1950, MGM's King Solomon's Mines dazzled audiences with its Technicolor visuals and exotic landscapes. But for fans of H. Rider Haggard's original novel, the adaptation missed the mark in all the wrong ways. Key characters like Captain Good and Sir Henry Curtis were either erased or awkwardly merged, stripping the story of its original camaraderie and complexity. Instead, the studio inserted a completely fabricated romance between Alan Quatermain and Elizabeth Curtis, played by Stuart Granger and Deborah Carr, a move that critics called out as a classic case of Hollywood formula trumping literary integrity. The New York Times review from November of that year described the film as visually impressive but noted as narrative liberties, subtly criticizing the departure from the novel's structure. Even more contentious was the film's sanitization of Haggard's nuanced, if dated, take on British imperialism. Where the book occasionally questioned colonial motives, the film leaned into spectacle, turning Africa into a lush backdrop while flattening its cultures into stereotypes. Film historian Kenneth W. Harrow later pointed to this as a textbook example of mid-century Hollywood's exoticism, where local tribes were either romanticized or villainized, but rarely humanized. Some speculate that the decision to sidestep the book's colonial critique was no accident. With decolonization movements gaining traction across Africa in the late 1940s, studios may have feared a political backlash. Despite its Oscar win for Best Cinematography, the film left many book loyalists feeling shortchanged. Letters to fan magazines at the time voiced frustration over the missing characters and shoehorned romance. Today, 1950s King Solomon's Mines stands as a case study in how Golden Age Hollywood often chose spectacle over substance, and how those choices didn't always sit well with readers who expected more. The Yearling. MGM's 1946 adaptation of Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings' Pulitzer-winning novel The Yearling earned praise for its lush cinematography and strong performances, but drew criticism for softening the novel's emotional core. Rawlings' original story was an unflinching look at rural hardship in post-Civil War Florida, where childhood was brief and survival came at a cost. The film, however, dialed down the grit. Scenes depicting the Baxter family's crushing poverty were trimmed or toned down, and the raw emotional weight of Jody's coming-of-age journey was smoothed over with sentimentality. While the pivotal moment, Jody's heartbreaking decision to end his pet deer Flag's life, remained, its brutal context was diluted. In the book, it's a devastating rite of passage. On screen, it became a sorrowful but oddly gentle life lesson. Film historians note that this kind of emotional sanitization was common in 1940s Hollywood, often to align with censorship standards and the post-war appetite for uplifting narratives. Some speculate MGM feared that a faithful adaptation would alienate audiences still reeling from World War II. Even the ending was reworked. Rawlings' novel closes with a sobering sense of loss and maturity. The film, by contrast, leans into optimism, offering a resolution that critics like Bosley Crowther of the New York Times called emotionally oversimplified. Studio letters reportedly reveal fan backlash, with readers accusing MGM of stripping the story of its emotional truth. Whatever the reason, the result was a technically beautiful film that, for many, missed the novel's emotional mark. The Magnificent Ambersons. In 1942, while Orson Welles was filming in Brazil under a U.S. government-backed cultural diplomacy project, RKO Pictures seized control of The Magnificent Ambersons. The studio, rattled by dismal test screenings and the film's bleak tone, cut approximately 40 to 50 minutes from Welles' original version, nearly a third of the runtime. They didn't stop there. RKO ordered a new, upbeat ending to replace Welles' somber conclusion, which had echoed Booth Tarkington's critique of industrialization and the decline of aristocratic families. The result? A sentimental wrap-up that critics at the time slammed as hollow and inconsistent with the novel's message. Entire scenes depicting the Ambersons' downfall and the rise of modernity vanished. The missing footage wasn't archived, it was destroyed. Wells later referred to the edits as a mutilation, a word that's stuck in film history ever since. Film scholar Jonathan Rosenbaum has called the incident one of Hollywood's most tragic studio interferences. What remains is a fractured masterpiece, technically brilliant, emotionally stunted. Rumors have long circulated about a surviving print hidden somewhere in Latin America, though nothing has surfaced. Some dare to guess that this studio betrayal permanently altered Wells's career as Hollywood executives grew wary of his uncompromising style. The magnificent Amberson stands as a stark warning. When commerce overrides vision, even genius can be left on the cutting room floor. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.